We'll keep moving, folks. Again, I just want to introduce Paul. Paul works for the Queensland Conservation Council and comes from the Big Light, and forgive me for the pronunciation, Borogo of Boomay, Gamilaraay Nation of Northern New South Wales and Southern Queensland, and also from the Narangba Nation of Southeast Queensland. For over 40 years, he's been continuing the age-old practices of teaching the cultural knowledge and customs of his country, from preschool, primary, secondary and through to universities. More importantly, within his nations, he has been using the strict but highly unique educational tools that his parents and their parents have passed on to him and have continued within their nations. Would you welcome Paul?
You can see I'm a flash black fella here. I've just got my phone here. Yamagara Ninde, Niga, Winningali G, Cabin Gunigal, Bume, Narbal, Nay. I just introduced myself traditionally. My proper Gamilaraay name is Winningali G. And in my language, Winningali G means to teach and learn from the heart. I've got with me my kin or my law son, Josh Waters, who's a local boy here, and a very young, deadly, knowledgeable Gamilaraay man that I'm proud to say is my son. And my yarn today is about Gamilaraay people's Indigenous knowledge and food sovereignty. I work with the Queensland Conservation Council, and my role is the Protect Country Strategist. And within QCC, I travel around from the bottom of Queensland up to the top of Queensland, working with our First Nations people to ensure that they've got a voice at the table. When I mean at the table, I mean as far as conservation and the protection of who we are as First Nations people when it comes to the environment. Now, the Queensland Conservation Council acknowledges that we work on unceded Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands and waters, and we pay our deep respects to the First Nation peoples whose lands we're on at the moment, in particular their elders past and present. So I respect the local people that come from here, absolutely, for allowing me to stand here and for my family to have connections to this country here through our laws, our songs, dance and stories. Just a quick little thing there. Now, Gamilaraay people used to travel along the Weir River up to the Bunya festivals, and we'd stop at Cecil Plains or Jarrawa country, and that's where we'd camp. Then our people would go to the Bunya festivals, and on our way home, we'd travel down through, Oliver mentioned, Bunjalung country. We'll travel back through Bunjalung country, down through Stansel, down through Ngarrabal country, back to Gamilaraay. And that ensured that we understood whose lands we were travelling in and how we respected each person's country through song, dance and stories. So my yarn today is about Galumaligu Nianingu Walabaguli, Dunbar Ganalayul Gali Wiralaba, caring for our homelands, native millet, grass seeds, plains grass and native plant foods and water since time immemorial. So Ba in our language means there's no beginning, there's no end. We are always consistently a part of Ba, which is time. So in Gamilaraay existence, it doesn't mean 5 minutes from now I belong, or 5 minutes ago I belong. It's an ongoing circle of renewal, of being a part of our existence. So within my role as a Protect Country Strategist for the Queensland Conservation Council, I am more than aware that First Nations people still maintain an ongoing cultural and spiritual connection to our nation's lands since Ba time immemorial. This gives us the right to build and embrace our ancient knowledge base and still maintain an ongoing connection to our traditional food and food gathering practices. Now, a collective that I'm a part of and Josh is a part of is called the Gamilaraay People's Food Sovereignty Working Group. We are people of the Gamilaraay Nation. Our sovereignty over our lands and waters has never been ceded. We come together as a sovereign people to lay the foundation for change on our terms. Our people have always invested in our country. We come together as custodians of country and waterways, of law, language and songlines to actively pursue and protect our rights as First Nations people. Today we stand at a crossroad. We are facing an undeniable climate crisis. We are in the midst of a mass extinction event and the world is losing its Indigenous knowledges and languages at an alarming rate. These existential threats to all people sit alongside the continued oppression and exclusion of our people. We do not have time to wait for someone else. Native grains are incredible important to Gamilaraay people culturally, but we also see the opportunity to shift paradigms through the reawakening of this food system. Gamilaraay people are coming together with the intention of setting up our own structure that is grounded in our sovereign identity and informed by our traditional systems of governance. We have the intention to use this body as a vehicle of self-determination in the native grain space and then into the broader food and agricultural industry. Self-determination in this context is synonymous with nation building. Native grains have been sustaining First Nations people of Australia for at least 60,000 years. To Gamilaraay people, native grains hold a deep social and cultural significance. Today we're seeing a shift in paradigm through the reawakening of this food system. I'll just introduce Josh Waters here, just to, if you want to talk about what you want to talk about.
Yeah. I use my phone too. Sometimes I refer to it as a contemporary message stick because I keep my notes on there. So I'll start by saying Yamang Indai Gaba, Galigalga Geringa, Gare Gamilaraay Gwaldananga, speaking Gamilaraay on this country, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I extend my respect to Brother Shannon over here as well, as a traditional owner, traditional custodian of these lands and waters. And just a bit about myself. So again, my name's Josh Waters, and I'm a Gamilaraay man, and I'm originally born and raised in Tamworth, which some of you will know as the country music capital of Australia. And I've been up here for around about 15 years. I'm a current PhD student at Deakin University and a senior research fellow there as well, working within the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, but also I do a lot of work with the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab coming out of Deakin as well, and the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Collective. I'm a director of that emerging entity. And I'd just like to also acknowledge the anniversary of the historic no vote yesterday. A year on doesn't mean that we go away from those approaches and things that we know are important in that space, but giving voice to First Nations people in this space, but also all spaces across the country at all levels. So as Buba, my uncle here and law father mentioned, we're part of a Gamilaraay food sovereignty group, which is designed to accelerate opportunities in the native grain space and traditional food space. And I just quickly like to highlight some of the issues that we've sort of rubbed up against in that space and some of the ways that we'd like to go forward. So what we found as part of the group is that firstly and foremostly, Australia is well behind in the native grain space compared to other areas and native communities, Indigenous communities worldwide. Despite having some of the oldest continuing cultivated grasslands on the planet in all parts of the country, and I'd like to also sing out the Bunyas, Bunya Mountains. If anybody has been up there, you'll see some of the oldest continuing cultivated grasslands on the planet, and they hold very high significance, ecological, social, cultural, and historical, and they're worth protecting. And then the other thing is that there's still not enough recognition for how Aboriginal groups have shaped ecologies across the landscapes across the entire continent, and that's through things that have already been mentioned, like story protocols and cultural practice processes for many tens of thousands of years. And the space that we kind of sit in is making some making some advancements in the native grain space, but also reformatting some of the ways that native grains is currently being conceptualized. There's many movements that are happening across the country, and even on our country, there's several sort of movements happening in northwest New South Wales and various parts of New South Wales, where there are very old and very culturally significant grasslands and grassy plainlands down there as well. So moving not just in the direction of native grains, but also looking at native grasses, because you don't have the grains without the grass, and you don't have the grass without appropriate cultural practices that are being implemented on those landscapes as well. And you don't have those processes unless you engage with First Nations people. Two of the main grasses that we use were Gamilaraay, native millet, and Gully, panicum. Those were used traditionally by Gamilaraay people for again many tens of thousands of years, and our people along with surrounding area peoples and communities were observed cultivating these grasslands and working them to produce breads and cakes, as described by Major Thomas Mitchell in the 1830s along the Lower Balonne River, and I'll just read out a quote from him. So, dry heaps of this grass that had been pulled expressly for the purpose of gathering the seed lay along our path for many miles. I counted 9 miles along the river in which we rode through this grass only, reaching to our saddle girths, and the same grass seemed to grow back from the river, at least as far as the eye could reach, through a very open forest. And make no mistake that that's not a coincidence, but those grasslands were very deliberately and intentionally cultivated for the purpose of maintaining a healthy landscape, firstly and foremostly, because healthy landscapes equal healthy people, and cultivating the grass seeds to nourish and sustain communities in those areas. And many of you will be very familiar with the concept of biopiracy. As we venture into these spaces, we run up against many issues, including biopiracy is probably the main threat, but it's a real threat to groups like ours and many across all parts of the world. As Indigenous groups try to reclaim their systems of knowledge and access traditional and contemporary economic livelihoods, biopiracy continues to be a threat. Poverty and disease threaten Indigenous populations, and we've already heard about the range of issues that threaten some of our ecologies and environments. But in specific regard to our group, Gamilaraay Food Sovereignty Group, genetic resource piracy is probably the biggest issue that we face, along with traditional knowledge or biocultural piracy and appropriation. And I'll just sing out Jerry Turpin up the back there. I know he's been a key person in highlighting the importance of biocultural aspects of Indigenous communities, and also the lack of community consultation and transparency regarding explicit measures for the implementation of proper or traditional cultural governance structures versus government elected officials predetermining outcomes before they even set foot in the community, if they do. Well, there are several measures that have been adopted by groups to effectively enact and facilitate co-design processes. This still has its issues, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach that will suit all Indigenous groups. Conventions on biodiversity and non-human species protection is an ongoing movement, and the Nagoya protocols can support impactful outcomes for Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities seeking to protect their intellectual property or their Indigenous cultural intellectual property and their cultural values. At present, however, better protective structures are still required to support community groups in revitalising traditional practices. Multinational companies interested in commercialising and monetising Indigenous cultural practices and Indigenous knowledges continues to expose loopholes in state and federal policies designed to uphold the integrity of Aboriginal food sovereignty movements and Aboriginal food landscapes. As it continues to be shown with consumption of traditional foods comes the significant nutritional and dietary benefits, particularly with some of those grasses and grains that I mentioned before. Indigenous groups such as ours and many others in Australia just don't have the resources or the capital to compete in the Red Queen's race against internationally recognised corporations involved in genetic biopiracy. We just cannot compete. These corporations, as they partner with sandstone universities across the country, attempt to link in with pocket groups within several nations, particularly ours, which covers 17,000 square kilometres of terrain with many diverse ecologies and nationally and globally renowned grassy plains. So just some advice to everybody here, if you're doing co-design, just keep in mind that there could be several groups that you're interacting with across a vast landscape. So getting a yes from one group doesn't mean that it's a yes from all groups, and that there's traditional protocols and processes that are in place there to protect against exploitation of community groups. By raising the profile of these issues, it's a cog in the machine that will support us in finding proper ways forward that are inclusive of Indigenous voices and pushing for stronger changes to protect ICIP at national policy and strategic levels. So it's great to see you all here today, and great to see all the investments into this space, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to share our story. So thank you.
Okay, I'll just put blackfellas up here and we'll look for a guitar in a minute. Country music, capitally. But as I said before, I work with QCC, and within my role as a Protect Country strategist for Queensland Conservation Council, I see this every time I go out into communities, and I work from Colomulla right up to the Gulf. So, and I'm the only person in my position. So my role crosses over into renewables, it crosses over into water management, deforestation. And so in my role, as I said, I come into contact with First Nations people, and I'll also acknowledge, Dr. Jerry Turpin there as well, because his biocultural knowledge base is so important to us. And one of my questions was going to be to Desi and to Paul and Jen was, it's not about ownership. It's about belonging as First Nations people, belonging to that country, to that plant, to that water. Because without anything, we have to have gully. That gully is water. That sustains all of our plants and our environment that we come into contact with. So our people understand and identifying food sovereignty, landscape planning for restoring and protecting country while dealing with mineral mining, farm clearing and deforestation. We see our cultural knowledge as a sustainable methodology in carrying on our old ways of land management practices with Gamilaraay people's Indigenous knowledge and food sovereignty, which is a part of our everyday life and existence since Bar. So Gabi Yinda, Yalu.
Thanks so much, Paul and Josh. I'd really like to take a question or two. We've got them.
Well, Paul will give you $20 if you ask your question.
That's right. Give me more, actually. Thanks, Kathy.
Sorry. Thanks so much, Paul. And is it Paul and Paul? No. Josh and...
No, I'm better looking than him.
Twins.
Yeah. Look, I just wanted to give a bit of a shout out because I've actually been in touch with your colleague Jacob Birch. He's actually over in North America at the moment, learning from First Nations people there around how they've set up their native grains industries. We're hoping at the National Seed Science Conference next year in Horsham, which isn't too far for you, Paul, is to actually get a workshop together to look at the whole issue of First Nations food sovereignty and native grains and how we can have sort of more Indigenous-led research, science and practice in that space. So, yeah, I think getting your message out into some of the, what are probably seen as whitefellas conferences is a really good way to go. And, yeah, thank you for coming along today.
Cool. Thanks. Look, just to quickly answer to that, our cultural existence is around who we are as people first and foremost. And when we look at science itself, that word science, they leave First Nations people knowledge and understanding of their existence, they leave that out of the picture. So they don't see science and cultural knowledge and understanding in the same position. They see it here, where that has to change. Where when they look at sciences today, different dynamics of science, they have to look at First Nations knowledge and understanding. Because we could have an old man there that has more knowledge and understanding than you have in a PhD, 20 PhDs. So that knowledge and understanding has to be accepted by the wider population. Do you want to quickly answer something?
Yeah, I'm doing a PhD, so I can say that,
Yeah.
you know, learning both ways. Like, yeah, PhD is a very hard and strenuous journey, but you know, sitting with Buba for just over 10 years has been an extraordinary and mind-blowing at times journey in itself. And yeah, it's twisted my brain in knots and all types of, you know, expanded it in different ways. That yeah, I would say there's probably a lot more, more density, I guess, in that information and knowledge, because you're constantly having to go further and further and make these big extensions. So yeah, there's an extraordinary amount of information just in those systems, and it keeps going forever. Which is why relationships within the community are so important, because you can't carry that knowledge yourself. You have to be able to distribute it. You have to be able to allocate it based on you know, geography or location or community expertise or status in the community. So that those systems are in place for a reason. It's because we can't carry all that knowledge ourselves, and sometimes we're not. Most of the time, we're not meant to, because it's just too much. You can't. It's not possible. But yeah, it's all embedded in the landscape, and it's all there. And you know, this movement into the food sovereignty space, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because it is an effective way to protect the knowledge and to retain belonging within community groups, and keep the expertise where it is, and bring people in through certain Indigenous processes and protocols, which, you know, protects the knowledge and makes it sustainable, and gives it opportunities to be transferred across time. So there's a whole bunch of governance there that's really important to acknowledge. But the other edge of that sword is that, you know, it opens it up for appropriation and exploitation from corporate groups that have access to wealth, resources, capital, and land, because that's one of our other big barriers, is that we don't have appropriate access to land to be able to cultivate or recultivate some of that knowledge and those grasslands and those foodscapes. So it is a good thing, but it does come with its disadvantages, and it's good for everybody to know that before they go into supporting things like this, so that you are aware of the disadvantages and you can kind of mitigate some of the risks coming in as well. So it's great to hear that there's more workshops happening in this space. I strongly encourage that, but yeah, with First Nations people leading those processes as they have done for 60,000 years or more, and more.
Thanks so much, Paul and Josh. I'm sure there'll be a lot more questions at morning tea